Welcome back to another episode of Shit I'm 30 with me, your host, Carla Wilmaris. And today my friend on the show will be James Smith Esq.
All right. Thank you for having me.
Yes, he's an attorney here in Orlando. And as my sister said to me, she said, you're the Johnny Cochran of Orlando.
She's too kind. I think that just shows how you can get anyone to say anything about you if you pay the right amount of money.
When she told me that, I told her that I was going to reach out to you, and she told me, I said, is he really? I'm like, I just wanted like a really good criminal attorney to come on. She's like, oh yeah, he's great. I'm like, oh, this is perfect. That means he has good stories.
Absolutely. Well, it's quite an honor. Your sister is an incredible attorney, great work ethic, really intelligent person. So for her to say something like that, to give me that type of compliment, is really a great thing.
Well, she did. Now, there I am dropping stuff. Before we start, we do an segment, Shit You Should Know. And it's basically, I explained in a couple episodes before, I wake up every morning and usually go to bed reading the news. And I've come to find out that's part of my anxiety that I have, that I deal with. But I'm just going to have to deal with it because I need to know what's going on in the world. So the other day I get a notification about 11 infants the bodies of 11 infants found in a Detroit funeral home that was closed down. And I said, what the hell is going on? So basically the funeral home, Cantrell Funeral in Detroit, Michigan, was shut down back in April due to a number of what they call disturbing violations, including improper storage of embalmed bodies. In one of them, it was even an advanced decomposing stage. It's disgusting. I can only imagine the smell. So there's 11 bodies of these babies. A letter was sent anonymously describing exactly where the bodies could be found. They were found in bags and most in a cardboard box, and some other ones were stuffed in a small coffin. The authorities are still investigating it, and they apparently know who some of the babies are, and they have names of them. It grabbed my attention because I was in charge of my dad's funeral. When he passed away, I had no idea I would ever be in charge of anyone's funeral arrangements, or it wasn't a funeral because we didn't have a funeral itself. But I had to make a casket and go to the home and deal with all these things. And I was like, do I even know what's in his ashes? And I opened mine up actually a couple of months after he passed away because I'm nosy like that. So I opened it and it looked like sand from the beach. And there were a few what looked like bones. So now I'm sitting here wondering, do I have a dog in there or a cat or like somebody else's uncle in there? I don't know, which to me doesn't really bother me because once they pass on, their body is nothing.
Right.
I don't know. I don't know what it is. But have you ever heard of anything like this? Or have you ever heard of an instance where a funeral home has done something?
Absolutely. And I think this raises an important issue that a lot of people need to think about, particularly with the upcoming elections. And that's the notion of regulation. The funeral home industry is incredibly powerful. There's two things that are certain in life: death and taxes. And so given that we have...
say we're going to be born.
Right. But given the fact that death is something that we're all going to eventually achieve at some point, that means that the funeral home industry is incredibly profitable.
They make a lot of money.
They make an incredible amount of money. Just a little trivia thing that I did doing some research. You sent me the story that you wanted to discuss. I did not realize this, but Run DMC, the famous rappers, they majored in mortuary science. And that's actually what they planned on doing. Yes, that was their fallback position. If their musical careers didn't take off, they were going to run funeral homes. And that's because their parents told them, listen, you can make a lot of money doing this.
Phaedra from The Real Housewives also did the same thing.
Exactly.
During the show, I remember that. She said it was money.
That's right. She's like, listen, this attorney stuff is sort of cyclical, up and down, but people are always going to die. Well, given how profitable that business is, they have an incredible amount of power with regard to state legislatures. There are very few industries which are probably given more free reign than the funeral home industry. There are not a lot of rules, not a lot of regulations. So as a result, they get away with a lot of stuff. Pretty much everything that we do on a daily basis, the water that we're drinking right now, if people are taking a flight, for example, the airwaves where this podcast is going to be on, all of these activities are subject to regulations. There are regulatory agencies that make sure that people know what's in the water they drink, that the airplanes we fly on are going to be safe, that the food we eat doesn't have toxic waste in it, for example. But with regard to funeral homes, there's not a lot of regulation. And I think the reason being is because death is a topic that most people don't want to think about.
They don't even talk about it.
Exactly. And most of us don't think about the need to make certain that the remains of our loved ones are treated in an appropriate way. Frankly, that the people who cast themselves as people who are qualified to do this are in fact qualified. So when I saw the story, frankly, I wasn't surprised. If you Google this, you'll find that this is quite common.
Wow.
There are a lot of funeral homes that cut corners, that do all sorts of things. And I think it just goes to this idea that we have to have more regulation.
I would love to actually, I think I'm going to maybe reach out to a funeral home, because when we did my dad's, I was looking around and like, we need to pick a casket. First of all, they cost as much as a Rolls Royce. I said, well, sir, he's just going down in this thing. What do you mean we're cremating him? It's just a bed he needs for a couple of hours.
Right.
2 to be exact. After that, so do you have where's the cardboard ones? And they're like, oh no. So then we pick one. I think it was like $6,000. And I was like, well, where are the rental ones?
Right.
Let me just rent one. And they said they can't rent them because they have a serial number. And supposedly, and quote unquote, they throw them out or burn them after a body has been in them. I just don't think that's true.
Well, the thing is, it's hard to know because there's really no way of knowing what's going on. Take, for example, stocks and bonds. We have a regulatory agency, the Securities and Exchange Commission,
Right.
that makes certain that the things that are being done are done in compliance with the law. I honestly can tell you that I don't think I've ever met anyone who says that they work in the industry of regulating funeral homes to make sure that what they do is correct.
I've never heard of it either.
And I couldn't even point out any state or federal agency that has the responsibility of making certain that they do what they're supposed to do. So, something like this, it doesn't surprise me. And if memory serves me correctly, this was in Detroit, correct? Where
Yes.
this actually happened. There's an interesting article that I'll pass along to you that you can give out to your viewers or listeners later on. And it talks about how one subprime lending company essentially took over the entire city of Detroit and made a majority of the people who are going through the courts debtors. And I point that out just to say that there's a lot that takes place in cities like Detroit, which have been bankrupt for quite some time.
A long time.
When the city is poor, what ends up happening is things that you normally would look out for or take advantage of, they end up happening in very, very bad ways. So it doesn't surprise me, sadly, that this happens. What surprises me, though, is that this happened with babies, with infants.
Like, they're tiny. Like, what does it cost to just put them in? I mean, it costs, of course, but do it with an old person who done lived 100 years and, he lived his good life. This is a baby. This is a distraught parent. Like, I don't think I've ever been to a child's funeral, but I see them on TV.
Right.
And that just seems like the worst.
It does.
We expect to lose our parents. We expect to lose our grandparents, even if it's in a terrible manner. Like, I lost mine and we had no idea he was going to pass away. It was unexpected and it happened, but I'm burying my father. You don't expect to bury a baby, so at least be nice to them.
Right.
But I guess it takes less space.
Exactly. Well, I think it's just an eye-opening experience for us to let us know that we have to do much, much more in terms of regulation and making certain that, we don't turn a blind eye. Part of this is the fact that people don't want to pay taxes or pay the cost of government.
Yeah.
And, this is the type of thing that results when you don't adequately fund a government, when you don't have the regulators necessary to make certain that the right thing is being done.
Well, they're all going for Trump and Melania to take trips to go golfing and for her to be get new dresses every time. That's where it's going. And for his tanning, because that bad orange tan costs a lot of money.
Yes, it does.
And the comb over.
Yes, it does.
We need extra plugs on there.
Absolutely.
And for the lunch, for him to have a Kanye. But we talk about that later. Whatever they ate, I was hoping they had like a laxative in it, and both of them end up in the bathroom shitting all night, but it didn't happen. I guess they regulated that food very well, but they don't regulate the funeral home. So, like you guys heard, you sound like such an attorney. Such a smart man. I love it. Clearly, you've been doing this for a long time.
That's right. 24 years this year.
Wow. So, my question to you, what made you want to become an attorney? I was reading on your bio, and it said you were Army ROTC scholarship to Howard in Atlanta, right? In Georgia?
Well, for everyone who knows where I went to college, if I say that I went to Howard, I'd probably be killed immediately. I actually went to Hampton.
I knew it was an H.
That's right.
It was one of them that are against each other. I knew it.
You were probably reading my mother's mind. She wanted me to go to Howard
Did
University.
she?
That's right, because Howard was where she wanted to go.
Okay.
But I ended up going to Hampton University.
Did DJ Envy go to Hampton?
I don't know.
I think it was him. He went to one of the two. And I know they're always fighting about it. If you tell him
Right.
the wrong one, it's a problem.
Right, yeah. That's where I went for undergraduate school, and I went to law school at Duke. So, but as far as why I decided to get into the law, my father was in the United States Army.
Okay.
And I remember one day I went to work with him, and he said, I want you to come and watch something. And I went and watched a court-martial. It was a trial of a soldier in his unit. And I just totally fell in love with what I saw. It was just amazing to me to see the lawyers up there making their arguments, questioning the witnesses. And I said to myself, I think this is what I really want to do. And I kept talking to my parents about it. So my parents are really good at exposing my sister and I have a sister, to things that interested us. So I started reading a lot of books about the law, going and watching a lot of the courts martial. I'd say probably the thing that helped me the most was growing up over in Germany.
Oh, wow.
I was in a very small German village, and so there weren't a lot of opportunities to go out and do a lot of things. So I spent just a lot of time reading. And I came across a biography of Thurgood Marshall and just totally fell in love with that. So I would read as much as I could about him, about the civil rights movement. And by the time I made my way to my junior year, I just kind of had a set idea of what it was that I wanted to do.
Law school.
Loved it. Absolutely loved it. So the Army paid for me to go to college. And then after I graduated, the Army paid for me to go to law school. And now, boom.
If I wasn't scared of going to war, I would have done that, because these student loans that I have now, they're awful.
Well, I can tell you, anyone who's thinking about a career in the law, I would highly encourage people to think about going into the JAG Corps, because it really, truly is an amazing opportunity.
Yeah.
There are a lot of good things you can do.
Do you have to go to war?
There are combat opportunities. That's one of the things when you sign up, they tell you, if you are going to be in the United States Army JAG Corps, understand you are a soldier first and a lawyer second. And so, yes,
Can they still call you in?
They probably would really have to be desperate to call me in, as old as I am. But yes, technically, if you've served at any point in time, one of the things that you acknowledge when you sign the contract is, if need be,
you go first?
You could be recalled back. Now, again, I'm probably not going to go first. I'm 49. They're likely not going to call me. But let's just say if we had Independence Day 3 and aliens decided to attack us, yes, I would be subject to recall.
Oh, my.
Service. And I did go to some combat areas. I had a chance to go to the Balkans. I had a chance to go to a couple of other places. Can't give away the locations.
You say the chance to, like you were on vacation.
Well, I know this may sound odd and strange, but when you go to some of these places, you get a chance to encounter new cultures, see some new interesting things.
That's what I love about traveling.
And I'll just give you one example. One time we actually did a trial in an armored personnel carrier. So literally, I'm sitting right next to my client on one side of the armored personnel carrier. We have on, bulletproof vest and combat gear. What? And then the other side is the prosecution, and the judge is sitting right next to us.
That sounds like a movie.
Yep. You ever see the movie A Few Good Men?
Yes, but I don't remember it.
All right. Well, this is the one with Tom Cruise and Jack Nicholson. The whole episode where he says, "You can't handle the truth." That's what I spent most of my career in the Army doing. I was a military defense counsel. So I represented soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines who were charged with crimes. So just imagine any crime? Any crime. Just imagine any trial that you would see in the civilian sector. Well, the only difference would be that the people would be wearing uniforms. So I represented people charged with running drug gangs on military bases.
Get out.
Oh, no.
What happens?
Yes. A lot of the bases in Texas are close to the border. Oh. And so the cartel started to realize that they could successfully transport drugs across the border by employing soldiers, because they would not be viewed as suspicious.
Smart. These cartels, boy, I tell you.
Exactly. So a lot of fraud cases, surprisingly a lot of prostitution cases. One of my clients one time at Fort Hood was running a brothel on base.
What?
Yes. This is in the early days of the internet, and he created a website using the wives of soldiers who were deployed. And yes, he made a lot of money, but was eventually charged with running a prostitution ring on base.
Did he at least give a cut to the husbands? You should at least give him a little bit.
Well, no, and I think that's how he ended up getting caught, because there was one husband who...
You find out he wasn't getting a cut.
Well, ironically, he went online himself to try to find a prostitute and came across the website and saw his wife there.
Oh, my God.
Went home, confronted her about it, and said...
And she spilled the beans.
Right.
Snitch.
Right. But interestingly enough, though, he got acquitted. This client.
Stop.
Yes.
With you as his lawyer.
I was his defense lawyer.
There's the Johnny Cochran we were talking about.
That's it. That's what made me famous. There you go.
That's where it comes from. That is a good story. Man, they smart.
Right.
Oh, wow. Right. So one of my things that I was actually going to ask you is, how do you defend someone that you know it's guilty And how do you keep your conscience clean as a lawyer?
Good question. And that's a question that I think every lawyer is required to be asked at least every 6 weeks.
Really?
Yeah, it's kind of like on my calendar. It's been 6 weeks. Someone's going to ask me. No, I joke. Whenever you go to cocktail parties or events like that.
I figured it for a criminal attorney at least.
Right. When you tell people you do criminal defense, the first thing is they sort of look at you and they think, oh, my goodness, if he's a criminal defense attorney, does he hang with criminals himself? So, but then, and I understand.
They're kind of cool people. Been around them. They're fun.
I understand why people ask the question because I think, people want to know how can you defend someone who you know is guilty.
Right, like pedophiles and stuff like that.
Right. Well, let me tell you a story about probably the most difficult case that I had to handle. I worked for the Federal Public Defender's Office for several years, and one of the last cases that I handled there was a case of a woman who was accused of and eventually pleaded guilty to having sex with her own children. So everything I'm about to tell you is the honest to goodness truth. Here it goes.
Okay, I'm ready.
So here's the background of the story. The young lady met a man online. He was a Marine Corps officer. They started dating. Eventually, the relationship became very serious. And at some point, he proposed to her. But he told her, once we get married, it's my goal for us to have an incest family. And she said, well, what do you mean? He goes, well, the Bible, if you read it clearly, condones incest because there's no way that Adam and Eve could have created all of these children without having sex with them as well.
That's
so as
weird.
a matter of logic, it's okay, and this is something that God condones. And he also pointed out, I guess, something about maybe another figure in the Bible who was alleged to have had sex with one of his daughters. So she agreed to it. They got married. They had 2 kids. The first child was a daughter. And as early as 6 weeks, they started having sexual activity with the young girl.
Wait. A 6-week-old baby?
6-week-old baby. They eventually had a son and did the same thing. The man, the father, the husband, while he was deployed to Afghanistan, would Skype with her and ask her to have sexual activity with the children while he could watch.
Oh, he's a sick bastard.
They eventually got divorced because he found another woman who was willing to do the same thing, and he was more in love with her. So he did these bizarre activities with this other woman, his new wife in Oklahoma. So the ex-wife, now my client, eventually joined the 2 of them one time for a weekend where the 3 of them had sex with children. Now, eventually, my client was captured because when she started dating again, she would tell men that one of the activities that she liked to engage in was sex with her kids.
What? Girl, don't you know it's illegal?
One of the men reported her to the FBI, Homeland Security. They eventually arrested her, and I was tasked to represent her because it was a federal crime. Now, I have children. That's tough. That's a tough thing to represent someone who is admitted to doing something like that.
Can you say no to representing someone?
When I was at the Federal Public Defender's Office, I couldn't because as a public defender, you get assigned your cases.
Okay.
When you're in private practice like I am now, of course, you can say no. And, there are times when I don't want to take on a case for any number of reasons.
But then this was your case,
right.
And that's it.
But this one I had to represent her. This is the way that I answer the question. How can you represent someone who you know is guilty? I think the same way you represent someone who you believe is innocent, and it's because you're not just there to defend the person, you're there to defend certain principles. The idea of the presumption of innocence, the idea that even though someone may have done something, they're entitled to fair punishment, fair sentencing. Now, I know what most people listening to this would think.
They got their face just like me right now because I'm sitting here like, Lord.
Right. Most people would have the natural reaction of thinking, you know what, someone like that should be given
dead,
perhaps exactly the
tortured, or send
possible.
her to jail in public. Ooh,
right
there.
Right.
Beat her up.
But over time, as you start to interact with clients, what you realize is that everyone has a story, and that there's something that will lead people down certain paths. If you're willing to ask the right questions, you can find out what it is. What is it that would make a mother do something like this? Well,
she did it for him.
Well, what you ended up finding out is that, first off, she was adopted. She had been sexually abused by her adopted father, and she had a history of mental illness.
Clearly, I mean, you
Right.
can't do this without having
Right.
mental health.
Right. So when you start to realize that she had suffered certain things that the average person never encounters in life, you start to realize that there is not a justification, but an explanation for what's happened. And so as a criminal defense attorney, frankly, most of our work is usually in the area of sentencing. Most of our clients, by the time they hire us, will either have confessed to the crimes to someone, or there's overwhelming evidence, and so they hire attorneys so that attorneys can help them present what we call these mitigating factors to a judge or to a jury, so that the judge and jury will realize, okay, you may have done this, but here are the 2 or 3 things that explain why you did what you did. So that's how I can end up doing it, because, I mean, let's just say, for example, someone walked into my office and said, I just chopped off the heads of 15 people, and there's really nothing wrong with me. I just wanted to do it for a thrill. Well, the first thing I would say is probably, there is something wrong with you. You just don't know it. What we need to do is we need to get a mental status evaluation done of you to find out why you could violate these norms that
Sir,
the rest of us hold.
that's the first thing you would do, because the first thing I would do is pull out my gun.
Right, right.
Make sure he doesn't get too close.
Right, check his hands and make sure there's no
Like,
swords
take a
there.
couple
Right.
steps back.
Exactly,
Speak to me from over there.
Exactly. But listen, there's just, I truly do believe that most people are born good. I have to believe that, I think, in order to survive
I think
mentally.
so too.
But I think what happens is that because of certain things like mental illnesses that are undiagnosed and untreated, because of drug addiction, because of
Your environment.
Right. There are a lot of things that can chip away at the souls of people and make it difficult for them to adhere to the norms that the rest of us adhere to. So it's not that we just, quote, represent people that we know are guilty. Rather, we represent people who we know have not had an opportunity to be either treated fairly by society, have not had an opportunity to have their stories told, and who, frankly, have not had an opportunity to have someone speak on their behalf.
You almost made me feel bad for that lady. Almost.
Right.
But I'm not going to let you. She is nasty.
Right.
That is just bad.
Mm-hmm.
Another question that I wanted to ask you is, the judicial system, we're now seeing with social media, it being given access to things that we weren't given access before the internet, the racism, I would say the injustices that happen within the judicial system. We now are seeing more.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking, you as an attorney and being around so many years, there's so many things that if we can see some, that's probably just the tip of the iceberg of what's going on inside. Are there more things that you see within the backgrounds and the inside that you're like, wow, whether it's with you being a Black attorney or with women, judges, like is there more? What do you see that you can say that's going on back there?
Well, I grew up with parents who lived in America during a time where there were signs that said whites only. And my parents, I think, did a good job of reminding me and letting me know that even though those signs were gone, the people who grew up seeing those signs and believing those things were still alive. One of the problems in America is that we don't have a good sense of history. We think of the era of segregation as having existed 100 years ago. No, not at all.
No.
Right? Frankly, we're still dealing with the effects of segregation to this day. And I always tell people, now I can laugh at the story, but I remember the very first time that I went into court as an attorney, the United States Army, defense attorney, and I have my client next to me. We're both in uniform, and the jurors come out, and they sit down, and the judge starts to instruct the jurors about how the trial is going to proceed. And there's a white military officer who raises his hand, and the judge says, "Major so-and-so, can I help you?" He goes, "Yes." He goes, "I'm confused because the style of the case says United States Army versus," and then he mentioned the name of my client. He goes, "But isn't he the one who's actually on trial?" And he pointed to me. My client was white, and I was Black. This guy in his mind could not get the idea, the stereotype out of his mind. He just naturally assumed, right? Naturally assumed that I would be the one.
You got to
who
keep
was
your
the
shit
defendant.
together.
And it was tough for me because I wanted to stand up and yell and say, Can't you see that I have the insignia showing that I'm a lawyer?
Right.
I'm about 10 years older than this guy. But the problem is that the racism or the bias was so ingrained that when he looked at me, it didn't compute. He had a certain idea of how things should operate. Now, flash forward and let's take a look, for example, in the United States of America today. Racism in the criminal justice system. The state of Washington, just this past week, the Supreme Court said, we are no longer going to allow people to be executed because our death penalty in Washington is too racist. There's too much of a danger that black people are going to be sentenced to death simply because of race.
Washington State.
Washington State.
Okay.
Exactly, Washington State. And, that I think is just the most recent glaring example of the racism that is not just in the criminal justice system, but is everywhere. As I was driving here to meet you for this podcast, I saw something pop up on my phone, and it was a story about a white woman who refused to let an African-American man get into an apartment building where he lived because she didn't believe that he lived there. She's white, he's black. She wanted him to prove to her that he deserved to go into that apartment building.
And who was she? Just the white lady.
Exactly. She lived there as well. And even when she saw him take his key and go in, she still called the police, and the police then responded.
I'm so over the...
And I think it goes to this whole idea of the ingrained attitudes that a lot of people have about who fits and who belongs. At least once a year, I will go into court dressed in my suit with my briefcase, and I will have lawyers on the other side say, are you here waiting for your lawyer? Even though I'm the lawyer myself, right? Things like that happen.
And you have to keep it together.
And you have to keep it together, exactly. Now, when I do jury selection, what I always try to do is I try to start off my jury selection by saying to people, I know that many of you have bigoted attitudes. I know that you do. And here's why.
You tell them that?
I tell them that. And the reason I tell them that is because I'll say...
I'm having to move the mic a little bit more.
Okay.
Right there. Perfect.
I tell them I know that you...
You can pull it if you want.
I tell them I know that you have these attitudes because the reality is at some point I've had some attitudes about people myself.
Right.
If we're human beings, we have to admit that we have certain preconceived notions about people. And the important thing that I tell them is I would much rather you let me know about these attitudes so I can decide whether you're going to be fair and impartial and for you to hide them and then end up getting on the jury and using those attitudes. So I start off by saying, I'm just going to throw out an ethnic group, and I want you to tell me 2 or 3 things that someone else has told you. And that usually gives people an out because they don't want to say, for example, well, I think that Puerto Ricans will carry a knife and cut you. They won't say that, but they'll say, well, that's what I've been told.
Right.
Or, that they usually have 15 people who live in an apartment. And I'll say, now, you mentioned Puerto Ricans.
In Kissimmee, I'm sure they do.
Right. And I'll say to people, can you tell me what race do you think I am? And they start getting nervous because they think, oh, my God, well, what is he? And
you can pass for Hispanic, though.
Well, exactly. And I get that. And people say, well, maybe you're black, maybe you're Hispanic. I said, well, what makes you think I'm black? And they go, well, the way you... I said, oh, okay, now see, at first you were resistant to this idea of preconceived notions. But you're about to say you think I'm black because of what? As well, you don't look like you're white. I said, okay, I'll give you that. I certainly don't look like I'm white, but what makes you think I'm black? Because I could be Hispanic, I could be Arab, I could be Persian, I could be a number of things other than black. You do go for all of them. Right. And I said, but when you say black American, what is a black American to you? What does that mean? What are the characteristics? And then eventually I see the light start to go off because they realize that we look at people, and based upon the way that people look, we make certain assumptions. Mm-hmm. And so,
So do you keep them?
Well, I'll give you an example. I had a woman who said, I am Puerto Rican myself, but I feel that I'm going to be harder on your client who's Puerto Rican because we already know the stereotypes that we have to deal with, and his actions, whatever they may be, have put us in a position now where another Puerto Rican person could be accused of a crime, and that's harmful to all of us. Most people would think, you know what, get rid of someone like her, but I actually would prefer to keep her because she's shown a willingness to be honest and forthright about things and also speak her mind about difficult subjects in a public forum. And I would rather have someone like that because in the jury room, she's not going to be bullied. As opposed to the person exactly who says, "Oh, I love everyone. I have no preconceived notions about people." See that
Puerto Rican? I like her. That's what I am. You're not gonna bully me.
Exactly.
Say what I want.
Exactly. But yeah, there's a lot of racism, and just look at the stats. For example, if you look in the 9th Judicial Circuit, where we are now here in Orange County, close to 90% of the people who get processed through the system are African American men, and yet on the bench, in terms of judges, there are only 2 African American men of all the judges.
How many judges are there?
We have at least about 30.
Wow.
You combine the 9th Judicial Circuit because you've got Orange County and then Osceola. So we're talking about all the judges who are handling circuit court duties in county.
Wow.
And there are only 2. So, that's a pretty startling
And we
statistic.
vote for judges.
We do. But let's be honest how we vote for judges. Now, most people, come next month for the election day, they're going to know everything about who's running for Congress. They're going to know everything about who's running for governor, right? They're going to know about the Senate race. And then what they're going to do is they're going to go through their phone, find the first attorney they know, and say, "Hey, tell me about these judges. Who should I vote for?" That's what most people do because, frankly, most people don't think about the fact that we elect judges until it's time to actually go to the booth and they see all these judges and like, "Oh, my God, I know nothing about these judges. Who are they?" Exactly.
Or we think about the sign. I sometimes look at the signs. So I'll be honest. The one I see the most signs about, that's usually, I've seen this name before. Bloop.
That's right.
That's
what
I voted for.
Cool sign, exactly. Or I like the person's name. Let's be honest about it. So, it's incredibly important that we pay as much attention to the judicial races as we do to the other races because most people are going to come into contact with the judicial system at some point. Divorce,
ding, ding,
property
ding.
Dispute, traffic ticket. Okay.
The
county courts.
Oh my God, I have a traffic ticket.
There you go.
I had to take care of it this week.
Right. See, the county courts are really the people's courts. But when we don't think about who we're going to elect, we end up electing people who sit on the bench, for the period of time. And during that period of time that they're there, they can really impose some hardships. I saw a woman get 10 days in jail, Chinese American woman who could barely speak English, because she had some tickets, the tickets racked up, and they suspended her license. Now, I think most people would say that is an awful result. That's immoral. Jail.
For tickets. How's she supposed to pay the tickets now if she's in jail?
Well, there you go.
And now she can't get a job because she got a record.
There you go. And see, and that's the problem is that a lot of people just simply don't pay attention to these judicial races. So, really to sum it up, is racism still alive and well? Absolutely. 100%. Sure. It's alive and well in policing. It's alive and well in charging decisions, and it's certainly alive and well in the bench. And let's just take a look, for example, in federal law. Okay. To this day, you are still going to get a harsher penalty for possession and distribution of crack cocaine than you will for powder cocaine. It used to be that the disparity was 100-1. So in other words, to get as much time dealing powder cocaine as you would get crack cocaine, you had to have 100 times the amount.
Wow.
100 times the amount. So now, what is that a racial disparity? Well, it's a racial disparity because we know that crack cocaine is primarily in the black community. Powder cocaine is primarily in the white community. Well, fortunately, we elected Barack Obama, and one of the major priorities of the criminal justice reform lobby was to end this racial disparity. And we were able to, but now it's only 18-1. So it's still racist.
It just went from 100 to 18.
Right, 18-1.
And I mean, they say it in the documentary 13th,
right,
by Ava. They talk about it,
right,
and they say how they were actually flushing all that crack into the communities.
Absolutely.
And they were doing it on purpose
Absolutely.
to keep basically the same slavery mentality and keep locking everybody up, mass incarceration.
I'm older than you are, but I can tell you, I remember in the late 80s and the early 90s, people talked about the CIA putting crack cocaine in the black communities in order to make money. And that was laughed at. The people who put forward these theories were derided as conspiracy theorists. It's now accepted as fact today.
Right.
Honestly, I mean, there have been Inspector General reports of the CIA which show, yes, we did in fact do that. During the 1980s, when the Reagan administration was looking for sources of funding to fund certain anti-communist armies in Central America, because they needed the money. Congress had cut off the funds because of concerns about human rights abuses. There were CIA case officers who said, you know what? Let's come up with this new drug, crack, and let's distribute it, and then we can get a cut. So, that happened.
And then we can arrest
exactly.
the black and Hispanics for selling.
Exactly. And so if you look at it, everyone benefited. The anti-communist armies in Central America benefited because they got the money. The CIA benefited because they had the source of funds. And this is something that a lot of people don't pay attention to. There were two lobbies that were really interested in this. The DEA and the prison lobby. The for-profit prison lobby in particular. The Drug Enforcement Agency's greatest nightmare is that people in the United States will stop using drugs. Right? Think about this. You have conservatives on the right who say, the welfare lobby, they want people to stay poor because they need these organizations to be around so they can have jobs, right? That's why they want welfare. You want to keep people poor because these agencies want to be able to hand out the checks so they can have jobs.
Right.
Well, if that's true, which I don't think it is, but if that's true, the same logic applies to the DEA. The DEA does not want the drug problem in this country to be solved because if it is, what does that mean?
They're out of a job.
We don't need as many agents. Exactly. And so therefore, the goal is to constantly make new cases, not reduce the actual number of people using and not reduce the supply. But more importantly, there's the for-profit prison lobby.
Oh, aren't they all like private businesses?
A lot of people don't realize this now. One of the big reasons why Jeff Sessions is the Attorney General is because for years he has been pushing. He's the Attorney General of the United States.
I know I heard that name. I just don't know where.
But one of the reasons why a lot of people on the right were excited about him becoming the Attorney General is because he's been in favor of moving more and more federal prisoners from government-run prisons to for-profit prisons.
Wow.
For-profit prisons, if you think about it, have one goal: to have as much, and this is the actual term they use for prisoners, inventory as possible.
Get out.
They do. They say we want to have as much inventory as possible. Another
and they're
reason,
not talking about uniforms.
No, they're talking about the people who are prisoners, human beings. The other reason that the for-profit prison industry loves Jeff Sessions is because he's very tough on immigration. And when you start detaining more people, then what does that mean? You need more detention facilities so you can thus have more inventory. In fact, here in the state of Florida, Rick Scott, he was really big. I
don't like him.
He's a bad guy. I really don't like him either.
I don't like him at all. Isn't he running for Senate?
He is. He's running for the Senate, and that's a tough race. Tough race because Bill Nelson is not exactly the most exciting or inspiring politician. And I want to say the most recent polls give Bill Nelson just a slight lead. It's within, frankly, the margin of error. But Rick Scott is getting a lot of money. And a lot of that money is coming from the for-profit prison industry because he's been really big at creating a lot of support for the for-profit prisons here in the state of Florida. The for-profit prison industrial complex wants more and more inventory. Thus, they support higher mandatory minimums. They want people to be locked up for the smallest offenses because if people go to jail, what does that mean? They have more inventory and their stock price goes up. Think of the perverse incentive.
Oh, wait. They're
publicly traded.
What?
Exactly. That's right. In fact.
So I can buy stock in a prison?
There you go. You sure can. Think about the perverse incentive there.
Wow.
The goal of these for-profit prisons is not to correct. It's not to rehabilitate people and return them to society. Rather, it's more and more inventory. And this leads back to your racism thing. Thus, what they do is they support politicians who will not get rid of the crack disparity, the mandatory minimums. They don't want certain types of judges on the bench because you need to make money, and the way that you make money is by keeping the inventory in. And they found that the most profitable way to do that, you mentioned the 13th, and the reason I think it's such an incredible documentary
amazing
is because it shows how you take the model of slavery and the plantation and how it still exists to this very day, but just in a different form. It used to be the plantation, and now it's the prison.
And they show the numbers, and when you see it there on TV and broken down in a minute, you're like, wow.
Exactly.
The plantation's happening right now.
Exactly.
It's the same exact thing, just at a different time, and it's just painted differently.
Totally. You know, if you look at a lot of the policies, sadly, you'll see that there's usually some racial element to it, and even more so if you look at the policies that are being enacted in states that used to be part of the Confederacy.
That's insane. So as we're talking about these and voting, do we vote for judges now for the midterms?
Yes, there are some. Now, here's the reality, though. Most of the judges, frankly, have already run by default, and that's because many of them don't get opposition, or many of them were able to win convincingly enough in the primaries so that they're the only ones in the ballot. But there are still some contested races. There are, I want to say, probably about 2 or 3 where there are multiple candidates.
Oh, I know. I searched, and I said this on my last show, and it's ballotpedia.org, and
Right.
it shows you when you put your address, who you're voting for, and what's going to go. I need to go on there and look at it ASAP again to look at the judges part. But there is one amendment that I spoke about before, and I feel like I'm attached to it because I didn't think, and I was brainwashed myself before with the amendment for it, thinking, yeah, if you were a felon, you shouldn't vote, period, point blank. And I was taught, and I changed my opinion on that, and I realized that I was wrong thinking that way. Do you have, well, I'm sure being a criminal attorney, you have clients that are now maybe out of prison and they can't vote. How does that really work? You are charged of any type of, it has to be a felony, and then you can't vote?
That's correct. The most important thing I think people need to know about Amendment 4 is that Florida, sadly, once again, finds itself outside of the mainstream when it comes to the treatment of people who have felony convictions. In most states, in fact, in an overwhelming majority of the states in the United States, after you've served your term, after you've gone to prison, done your probation, paid your fines, paid your court costs, in other words, repaid your debt to society,
Right.
you automatically get your right to vote back.
Oh, wait, it's only in Florida?
Florida is one of only 3 states that still requires people to jump through hoops.
Wait, I thought this was a countrywide thing.
Oh, no. This just
I
relates
thought it
to
was
Florida.
everywhere.
No, this just relates to Florida. So, and this is the difficult thing about it. Amendments to the Florida Constitution are usually written in such a way that's so confusing that it's very difficult for people, first off, to really know what's going on.
There was another one, Amendment 11. I
Right.
even took it off. I was going to talk to you
Right.
about it, but I had no idea. And I tried to Google what it really
Right.
meant. And even when I Googled it, I was still
Right.
confused.
Right, and and that is a deliberate thing. There is a deliberate policy on the part of a lot of people who push amendments to make them so confusing that people will just throw up their hands and say, you know what, it doesn't matter to me.
I threw both of mine out.
But for Amendment 4, this specifically refers to how we will deal with people who are Florida residents
Right.
and their convictions and how we're going to take care of this issue. So, in a nutshell, what the amendment would do is say, right now we have about 1 million, just a little over 1 million people in Florida who can't vote because of felony convictions. What the amendment would do is say that, with the exception of certain crimes, like, for example, if people have been convicted of certain violent offenses or sexual offenses, after they have served the term, after they've completed probation, satisfied all their court costs and everything else, well, they will no longer have to jump through the hoops that they have to jump through now, which is to actually apply for a restoration of rights. Okay. It's incredibly important. I want you to just think about this.
I had no idea.
If we had this in place, say, for example, in the last election, or if we had it in place, say, for example, for this midterm election, just think how different the United States would be right now.
Andrew would have been way higher than DeSantis.
There you go.
Mr. Little Trump.
There you go. So, make no mistake about it. When you talk to people who are opposed to this policy, they really have a hard time coming up with a rationalization for it that ultimately doesn't lead back to just pure, naked, raw politics. The Republican Party looks at it this way and says, listen, we see the potential for 1 million plus Democrats to suddenly now have voting power. That's frankly what they say.
Right.
So they want to try to throw as many barriers as they can to keep that from happening. But it really is a very basic principle, I think, of the criminal justice system. Think about it. from the earliest period in our lives when we get into trouble, we get punishments, but those punishments end. For example, go to your room. How long? For 15 minutes, and then you're allowed to come out.
Right.
In school, you get detention for a period of time, or you lose your ability to drive the car for a weekend. In other words, we don't give people punishments for a lifetime for the most part. I mean, again, now serious crimes, so if you get life for murder or a sexual offense, we say, you know what you've done is so egregious that, you know, there really should be no end to your punishment.
Right.
But take, for example, let's say a woman who, poor, desperate, goes to a Walmart and steals, you know, enough for it to be considered a felony theft.
How much is that?
Going to be over $500 in order for it to qualify.
That's like a couple of things.
Right. Should that person, frankly, not be able to vote for the rest of her life?
That's an iPhone. Stole an iPhone, now you can't vote.
Exactly. And there's a reason, though, why this happens, and let's be very frank about it. For years, the war on drugs was a major imperative, and we needed to punish people and put them in prison. Why? Because most of the people that we thought were using drugs were people of color.
Right.
Suddenly now, with the opioid epidemic, now we need treatment.
Yes, it's
we
mental health.
Exactly.
We need to get them doctors and now we want to fund it through the government.
Exactly.
Why couldn't we fund it education for the black communities?
Exactly. I can guarantee you this. If the 1 million or so people who didn't have the right to vote were white, this amendment would pass in overwhelming fashion. Absolutely.
So
Frankly,
we need to vote yes.
You need to vote yes. Absolutely. Need to vote yes on it because it really comes down to, I think, just a very basic, fair principle. When you have repaid a debt, should you be restored to society? And the answer is this. Yes.
You're
the
paying
answer is
taxes?
yes. Absolutely. Marginalization is not a good thing. When someone gets out of prison, think about what we say to them. You're not going to get a good job. You're not going to live in a good place. And you're not going to vote. Frankly, what we're saying is you no longer have the physical confines of a prison, but you have other confines now. Economic, residential, social, but most of all political. It's a permanent badge of inferiority, which frankly is wrong.
And which doesn't make it impossible for them to come out because some people do, but it's damn near impossible.
Absolutely.
To get any better. So guys, we're definitely, if you're from Florida, I know my listeners are from everywhere, but at least from Florida, whoever's listening, Amendment 4, vote yes. I know for a fact. I have some people who happen to be white, but I don't have any white people listening to my show. And so if you happen to be white, I'm cool with you. This is Amanda Seal says this, but I don't have white people listening to me. Just people that happen to be white. I do have, there's 3 questions. It was quick that people asked, and I figured you can probably answer it quick. He's not your attorney. He's just going to answer something real quick.
Absolutely.
I did get one. There was the last one I thought was really good. She said if she had been arrested before, but she got it expunged, can she put she has not been arrested on a work application?
Okay. Now, here's what I'm going to say. We talked a little bit earlier about disclaimers.
Yes.
The best thing I would do is I would say you need to take whatever paperwork that you have. If you've gone through the sealing or expungement process, you have paperwork. Before you fill out any application, take the actual application itself along with the paperwork to a lawyer and sit down and say, based upon what I have here, how should I answer this question? And here's why. Sealing and expungement are great things, and they offer great opportunities for people to be able to move beyond an arrest or a certain conviction. But there are certain jobs, for example, if you're applying for a job with the military or certain contractors, where they are still entitled to know this information, and it's better for you to err on the side of caution in terms of getting good legal advice before you answer the question.
Right.
So what I would say, and I would encourage that individual, contact me. I'll leave my contact information. Let me take a look at what you got.
The application.
The application itself, exactly, and what you have from the FDLE and ultimately the court order. And then we can make a decision about how you're going to answer that question, because more often than not, if you're applying for certain jobs, they may already know what your status is. They either do some background checks themselves or some due diligence. If it's expunged,
it's still in the background check?
Well, it depends on what type of position you're applying for. Like, for example, let's say you're applying for a job maybe with like Homeland Security or TSA, right? They will do a search on you, and the search may show on Google that there actually was an arrest there, even though it may not be reported in certain databases. So they know by, for example, now it's my understanding a lot of corporations will look at mugshots.com. I think there's a website out there.
Well, I like looking at that
Right,
all the
exactly.
time. When I worked at the pawn shop, I would put
Right.
people's name and found them all the time.
There you go. So they may already know that there was something there. Understand that now, because of the proliferation of information in the digital age, people are able to get information from many more sources than we realize. It's not just the official sources. So while the traditional, NCIC background check may not reveal it, another check might.
I wouldn't even have thought of that. I would have put no, and then if they asked me about Google, I would have said somebody's lying on me.
Right.
Somebody took my picture and put it on there.
Exactly. So it's always best, I think. And if it's a really good, high-quality job, more often if you explain to people, listen, this is what happened. This was a mistake 6-7 years ago.
Right.
But here's what I did, and I went through the process. They would much rather have you, I think, at that point then, because you've proven to them that you're transparent and honest, and they don't have to worry about you trying to hide something. Like the jury,
telling you about how she thought about it. You kept it because she was honest.
Big fan of transparency, exactly.
That's a good one. Let me say this. It says, I'm in Florida. I have 3 grand thefts and 1 fraud and pled no contest. Can I get it expunged? First of all, sir, or ma'am, I'm going to need you to stop stealing.
Right. There you go.
And committing fraud and pleading no contest. You just pled, you're guilty. But can you get that expunged?
Well, here's the difficult thing about it. You have multiple now cases here.
I need to know exactly. It wasn't a candy. It was big.
Right. I need to know a little bit more about this. Is this all part of one transaction? Or when you say cases, are you talking about sort of cases that are separated by intervening arrest? And so this is somewhat, part of the difficulty of answering a question like this. What I would do is encourage that person, get in contact with me. I'll take a look and see what you have there. There may be some ability to get at least one of those cases taken care of. There may be some other avenues as well. Sometimes you're able to get something removed from your books if there was an issue of perhaps ineffective assistance of counsel, or if you didn't really understand what was going on.
I would have been like, I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know anything. I was mentally deranged.
There you go.
Yeah, I wouldn't do any of that. Those were good. Oh, this one's pretty easy.
Absolutely. Most criminal defense lawyers have a standard form that they have clients fill out when they are retained, and there's a section which will state permission to communicate with third parties. And so the lawyer
like a doctor.
Exactly. They'll say, listen, our discussions are governed by a privilege. However, if you want, we can give certain information to these third parties, and then you write down the third parties' names. Okay. We usually try not to encourage that, because you say it to one person, then before you know it, the game of telephone and something, a traffic ticket turns into a homicide. So we try to discourage that, but it is possible.
Okay. I love that. You're probably like the smartest man I've had in this podcast yet.
No.
Whoever I had before is going to get mad now. You are extremely smart.
Well, thank you.
If I commit a crime, I think I might come to you. My sister might leave me in jail a little too long as punishment. I might have to come to you first.
Well, let me just say, it's a pleasure being on. I had a chance to see some of the work that you've done. Incredibly intelligent, but I also love the sense of humor.
Thank you. Cool. We're going to do unsolicited advice. And if you have heard, it's basically we give out advice to people who didn't even ask us for it. And this one, it's kind of funny that you're saying it, because you told me about one of your cases. And it's a 14-year-old that's friends with a 21-year-old. It's a sister that wrote this. She says, my sister has been quote unquote best friends with this white guy who lives a few number of doors down from us. From what she's told me, he's 21. He has a girlfriend and his own apartment. She's still a virgin, so I'm not worried about anything sexual. It's just that it's just so weird to me. I need my glasses. I'm getting old. Shit. I'm 30.
There you go.
That's right.
Get
I
the
can't
tagline.
See.
Exactly.
I think I need new ones. Okay, let's go. I don't even know how they met. She says that she doesn't remember how they met either. I do know that she texts him all day, every day, and she says that she's cool with his girlfriend as well. I just don't understand what a 21-year-old man and a 14-year-old child could possibly have in common. She goes to his apartment after school to hang out with him and his girlfriend for a little while. She tells me that he likes to make YouTube videos. I looked him up, and he seems pretty decent. He doesn't have a huge following though. He comes off as very kept together. He does a lot of cooking or DIY segments. I don't know. I feel so uncomfortable. This is just weird. What should I do? This was so weird to me, especially having a 13-year-old daughter. Okay. First of all, stop.
Right.
And he just sounds like a pedophile to me. Like the guy in the van saying, come get candy.
Let's just be honest here. There's no good reason at all for any 21-year-old man to be hanging around with a 14-year-old who is not his daughter or relative. Okay?
Yes.
That's odd, first off. Secondly, I'd like to know when you say you checked him out, what you did. What I would do is I would Google the FDLE sex offender database and see if his name appears there.
They have one that Watchdog or something like that, and it gives you their address and everything.
Right, exactly, because you probably are going to find that there's some issue with this gentleman.
Absolutely.
The
on
other
YouTube
thing,
doing DIYs?
Exactly. The other thing that really caught my attention here, the red flag, is that he's very active on the internet doing YouTube videos and things of this nature.
Where kids are at?
Right. There's just really no good explanation for a 21-year-old to be hanging around with a 14-year-old. I would bring it to the attention of the 14-year-old's parents. I would check him out. And
where are the parents? I was wondering, like, are you the legal guardian of her or what it is? Because I know my daughter, she's not going to hang around with no 21-year-old.
I saw a movie on Saturday, and knowing that I was coming here, I said, I want to make sure that I mention this movie to you.
Yes, please.
It's a movie called Searching.
On Netflix?
It's actually still in the theaters.
Oh,
It's playing at the Fashion Square Mall. I'm surprised it didn't get more traction, but it's an incredible film. It's a movie about a father whose daughter disappears, high school age daughter, and then he tries to retrace her steps by looking at her social media footprint. Every parent who has a teenager needs to see that movie. It's absolutely incredible, and I think you'll like it too,
I'm going
because
with her.
They talk about podcasting and they talk about various social media platforms.
Okay.
But it also raises this issue too of how easy it is for kids to be taken advantage of online.
So easy.
So yeah, it's called Searching. It is playing now at the Fashion Square Mall. You remember Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle?
Mm-hmm.
All right. The actor in there who played Harold, he's the lead actor.
Okay.
An amazing, amazing film. I think you'll
I'm going to
enjoy
go
it.
watch
Check
it
out.
because she does have an Instagram. I mean, she's grounded half the time, so she doesn't have her phone, but I get the notifications before she does. So I read all of her messages. I try to see what she's doing. I found out she had a different Instagram. She's like, what's a spam account? I guess that's a new thing now. I said, okay, that's just coming off your phone.
Right.
And we're changing the password so you can't get back in.
Right. Spam meaning the one I hide from my parents.
Yes. I realized that's what it is. Spam accounts are the ones you hide.
Exactly.
I wanted to kill her. Yeah, I think this girl needs to get her sister out of there.
Absolutely.
There's
that sounds
no
like a
excuse
very
for it.
unhealthy
And then when
environment.
it's like him and his girlfriend, you were just talking about the case with the lady and the husband, and they like to play with little kids, even though it's their kids. People do that for real.
They do. And there's a very, very sad, fact that I think we have to realize. Because of a number of things, we've left our children very vulnerable.
Yes.
And there are predators out there who know how to take advantage of them, and they are aided tremendously by the internet.
The internet, yes, her and I it's fights that I never thought would happen. And it's fights that I never even had with my parents because most of mine were like, nah, I want my boyfriend to come pick me up to go to the movies, or I want to stay out later, or I want to go 2 blocks over more. Now it's just the 2 blocks over more. It's just on the other side of the country from her bedroom. It's so scary. But yeah, I thought that ended up being a great one to do with you just because you have kids too and you got to watch a movie.
Right.
And then my last segment, which I actually didn't even want to talk about him at all, but it's for shit talk. You heard that one. I don't like to give Kanye any type of light of day just because I just don't like him. But the man that I do admire, and every day that passes and as time goes by, I see him maturing. That's Charlamagne.
Right.
To me, it's everything. Not everything. He does some really stupid things sometimes.
Right.
But, we all do. I do stupid things as well. He was doing a mental health talk on Thursday with Kanye. And when I saw this, when he does stuff and I'm like, I want to go. I'm always like, I'm ready to hop on a plane and go.
Right.
His new book is coming out, and I'm actually going to fly up there to go to a show that he's going to do talking about the book. And I was ready to buy this ticket and ready to go up. And I'm like, you know what? It's right before my live show, which is Saturday. Maybe I just shouldn't. Let me just chill, and I'll watch parts of it. It'll be on Twitter, or there'll be video of it. And I saw today that he canceled it. So it's been canceled. And he says, he put a caption under the cancel and says, normalizing being mentally healthy is a conversation that I really wanted to have with Kanye because he's been so vocal about his own mental health struggles. Unfortunately, I think I have to have that conversation with Unfortunately, I think to have that conversation with him right now would not be productive and a total distraction from the point of the conversation, which is to eradicate the stigma of mental health, especially in the Black community. Wow. I'm so proud of him for that, because I know this would have been huge for the movement of his book.
Right.
He has a book coming out. He has his first book did so well that you're thinking, I'm going to do whatever I have to do, and I'm going to sell my soul just to get book sales and to get the money out. But he didn't do that. He said, you know what? Forget that. When you just got here, I was trying to watch part of his lunch with Trump. I watched the SNL one, and I've watched clips on social media, but I didn't watch the whole thing because, first of all, it was like an hour.
Right.
I don't have time for Kanye for an hour. It was literally 4 minutes, and I was already like, what is going on through this man's mind? He really is messed up in the head. But like you said, we shouldn't look to a rapper for political views.
Right.
I have someone like you here who is educated, is in the justice system, and you can give me a better guidance than Kanye can when he says abolish the 13th Amendment. Is that what he said?
He did. And, he tried to clean that up afterwards and say that he was trying to talk about maybe changing it.
Correct. But this is why he shouldn't be the one, which is fine. I'm sure even on this podcast, I've said some things that are like, what did she just say? That didn't make any sense because I'm not an expert, and I can say I'm not an expert in that, and I'm not going to ask to go to Trump for politics.
Right. I think it's important to look at the larger issue here, and that is, why was the president having lunch with Jim Brown and Kanye West? It's the same reason
misusing them, I should say.
Exactly. There's a phrase that the Soviets used to have called useful idiots. The idea of saying, listen, these people may be idiotic, but they're useful in the sense that they can help us promote certain propaganda aims. Donald Trump knows full well what's in his heart. I like that word.
I'm going to call the podcast useful idiots.
He knows exactly what's in his heart. He knows that even after all the evidence showed that the Central Park teenagers were innocent, he still tried to keep the idea out there that they were guilty. Even after it became embarrassing for most Republicans to put out this lie that the president was not born in the United States, he still pushed it. He knows that he's a bigot. He knows that his father would not rent homes and apartments to African Americans.
He said in the first couple of minutes that he wanted to start factories, and they should be Trump factories because he's the king. And I said, sir, have you not seen all of the reports that are out that he will not rent to African Americans or Hispanics, that he doesn't pay them good money, that he's a terrible employer for anyone of color, but because you're not going to be the one working for him because you have money and you will forever have money, it doesn't matter to you.
Exactly.
So you're cool with putting everybody else within your community, which really I don't think the Black or brown community is it's Kanye's community.
Exactly.
His community is 300 acres on a mountain with no one around him but Kim and the babies.
Right. Exactly. It kind of makes the title of one of his albums painfully ironic, College Dropout.
Yes, it does.
It really does. And if you listen to a lot of Kanye's lyrics, which, I actually went back and started listening to a lot of his songs now, given, what's been happening.
The older ones? I haven't listened to the new album.
Yeah, some of the older ones. And, there's one song where he talks about how as soon as he got his advance, he went to Jacob, the jeweler, because he just wanted to shine. And I guess sort of the background for that, I'm going to try to prove now to my kids that I'm actually hip. I know that Jacob the jeweler is someone who provides a lot of jewelry for people in the hip-hop community.
He's been able to have a lot of fake and diamonds, too.
Exactly. And then, that's another issue in terms of why people would go out and spend money for craziness like that. But I think Kanye has, for a long period of time, talked about the fact that he's always wanted to be in the spotlight. The sense that I've always gotten from him is that he feels like people don't take him seriously as an artist, that he's too pop, or that he's the hip-hop artist that the mainstream likes. And I think that there was a certain almost antagonism that he has with the Black community, really, in a way, because when people talk about real, true rappers or hip-hop, who do they talk about? Jay-Z, Tupac.
But Kanye has been in there. Kanye is Kanye.
Right. But there was a lot, I think, of insecurity on his part for a period of time. And then I think a lot of people said, oh, look, here he is, and what does he do? He marries a Kardashian.
And got lipo.
Exactly. And so now, I sort of put him in the same position. My son mentioned this the other day, and he said, I think that Kanye is hip-hop's version of Clarence Thomas, someone who has become almost kind of distant from his roots in the community, and he now takes more pleasure being around conservative whites than he does his own community. Because if you think about it, Clarence Thomas when he was going through his nomination process.
I don't know who Clarence Thomas is.
Clarence Thomas is the only African-American male on the United States Supreme Court. You probably have heard of him. It's been a while because he doesn't talk. The Anita Hill hearings, remember back in the 1990s?
Oh, I was born in 87.
There you go. Oh, good. Now I feel so old. But back in the 1990s, Thurgood Marshall said, I've had enough. I'm too old for this, and I'm going to step down. And there's always been an understanding that there's a black seat on the Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people in the African American...
Was he there doing the Kavanaugh thing?
Well...
Because all I saw was white people.
Clarence Thomas was not, but his name kept coming up because there's this idea that history repeats itself, right? The first time is tragedy, the second time is farce, that famous quote. Well, Clarence Thomas was African-American from a place called Pinpoint, Georgia, and he was about as conservative as they would come. I mean, conservative whites would look at him and say, wow, we don't even think this stuff that you think.
He's a black conservative.
Right, black conservative. And before he got on the court, he went to Yale Law School. And one of the things that he said was that at Yale Law School, he developed a great disdain for other black students who were liberal and liberal whites. So he became very heavily involved in the conservative movement, very heavily involved. A couple of things about Clarence Thomas. He met his now wife when she was testifying at a hearing against equal pay legislation for men and women.
Wait, what? And she went against it?
She did go against it, exactly. Clarence Thomas, he took over the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and essentially shut it down, just made it defunct. It did nothing under his leadership. Well, when Thurgood Marshall stepped down, a lot of conservatives said, okay, it's going to be a black seat, but we're going to pick our type of black. One of the reasons why I've always loved Thurgood Marshall is because so many conservatives hated him. He used to put it to them all the time, and he would really call them out over issues of race. So Clarence Thomas was nominated, and it looked like his nomination was going to sail through until a woman came forward, see if this sounds familiar, and said that when she worked for him, he harassed her.
Okay.
This was a big thing now. Okay, I'm going all the way back now to the 90s. This actually took place when I was in law school. These hearings got 24-hour coverage. Anita Hill, she, at the time when she ended up making the accusation, was a law professor. She herself was a Republican, black woman, but she said that when she worked for Clarence Thomas at the EEOC, what he did was he came to her and he would talk to her about pornography involving overweight women. She said
BBWs.
Right. She said that he at one point came to her and said, hey, do you see what's on my Coke? Someone left a pubic hair on my Coke.
What?
Yes.
You wouldn't even be able to see it. Coke is dark.
Right. So she said she got sort of, the feeling that he was trying to hit on her, that he was interested in sleeping with her. Well, there was another woman who came out exactly as well and said the same thing. This was sort of the emergence of the idea of sexual harassment into the mainstream. But what Clarence Thomas did is he said, you know what, you guys, referring to Democrats, are pushing this on me because I'm a conservative black. And this is where the phrase a high-tech lynching for blacks came out. And he scared the white Democrats on the panel because they really didn't know how to handle the issue of race. And Clarence Thomas ultimately successfully was confirmed. However, it was the closest vote up to that point. Well, now flash forward to this year, we have someone who's a conservative Republican,
exact same thing,
nominated for the Supreme Court. A woman comes forward making obviously much more serious allegations, and Brett Kavanaugh, this is actually true now, in preparation for his testimony before the committee after the allegations came out, looked at Clarence Thomas' testimony and looked at the tapes, and they coached him. They said the same thing that Clarence Thomas did, you need to do that as well.
Wow.
Right, exactly.
I mean, it worked for him.
Exactly.
If it worked for him as a black man, it's definitely going to work for you as a white man.
The New York Times called Clarence Thomas the cruelest justice on the Supreme Court. He consistently is the most conservative voice, and he's very, 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 very alienated from the black community. And so my son, I think, when he was making the point about Clarence Thomas being essentially, or Kanye rather, being the Clarence Thomas of the hip-hop community, I think he was making the point of saying, here's a guy who went through conflict with the black community, and now this is almost his way of putting it in the face of the black community, because Kanye has to know that hip-hop does not like Donald Trump in no way. No self-respecting member of the hip-hop community is
even Eminem as a white rapper.
Exactly. We're really in a sad state of affairs, frankly, when Eminem is going to make a more eloquent takedown of President Trump than Kanye could.
Right. But didn't Kanye put down Bush back in the day?
And, you know, this is what's so important. I saw a funny meme, and it was so great. It's a picture of George Bush, and the caption says, Kanye doesn't care about black people. You know, full circle now, because really, in a way, how in the world exactly, you know, could you support, you know, President Trump? So, you know, I mean, just I guess to get back to the original point, though, Kanye, Jim Brown, Steve Harvey, the presidents of the HBCUs who went to the White House, they are all being used because think about the timing. We're about to head into a critical midterm election where people like Andrew Gillum.
I would say misused.
Exactly. People like Andrew Gillum and others, the woman who's running for governor in Georgia, race is an issue. Yeah. And so understand, Republican Party operatives, they're very, very smart when it comes to issues of race. And they know, sadly, the same way we talked about this earlier, people look and say, well, I'm going to vote for that judge because that sign looks good. Mm-hmm. People might say, well, maybe he's really not that racist. I mean, he did have that black guy, and then Jim Brown, who most people think is a black radical, who is not in any way. Jim Brown has never been a black radical. That's the biggest misconception out there. Jim Brown, for a long period of time, has been quite a conservative voice and a Republican. But, yeah, you're right. They're being misused because it's a good visual, and the visual, the goal is to distract people from the actual policies. They know that in an America where people watch more than they read, it's more important for there to be a good picture than good policy.
Yeah.
That's right.
Never written it down. Thank you. You are so smart. I can see now why your son would come up with something like that. Hey, having a dad like you.
Well, thank you.
Amazing.
Thank you. You're the one doing the great work here. I just go out and represent all the guilty people, as they say, right?
One day, that's what I wanted to do, go to law school. Mm-hmm. So my best friend in high school, we took every class together, Shaquana Harper. Mm-hmm. She, we decided we were going to go to school together. Mm-hmm. And we were going to go to law school together. And I got pregnant my senior year. And my plans changed. But she went off to FAM. Mm-hmm. Then she went off to Stetson on a scholarship. Mm-hmm. And now she's an attorney in Tampa. She's been an attorney since she was 24. Mm-hmm. So we're both 31 now. So it's a life that I would have done. I think I would have been pretty good. I would have had all the drug dealers. I would have defended them all, and I would have charged them cash.
Right.
I would have been living so good.
There you go. Remember, alleged drug dealers.
Alleged drug dealers. But now I'll make it over here talking shit, talking a lot, and that's going to make me some money one day.
Yes.
Well, one day.
Well, all the best to you. I think this is a wonderful podcast.
Thank you so
for
much.
Giving me your time.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for giving me your time. Your time costs a lot more money than mine right now. Thank you. Anyways, guys, the live show I'm releasing this tomorrow. So Saturday, October 20th is the live show. We released a few more tickets because Mandy from Horrible Decisions is coming into town from New York. I'm really excited about that. And remember, it's shitim30.eventbrite.com. Your ticket does come with a drink that is sponsored by ABC Spirits. Really excited. They were like, we're going to give you some bottles. I was like, oh, okay. So we'll see you on Saturday. Bye.